So delighted to be here. So thanks so much for inviting me. Sumit that I've met over the last sort of 2 years, and looking at what we can do coming towards sort of the evolution of digital technology and data and what we can do moving into the future. So I'm Victorian Chief Engineer. I've been in the role for about a bit over 18 months, and one of the key things that I had done on the outside is seen technology and data and tried to look at what we might do moving forward. So when I moved into this role, so I've come out, we were just talking about it actually with a couple of people. I've actually come out of a civil engineering background where I used to just go out and build stuff. You know, that's my passion, build roads, bridges, tunnels, water treatment plants, so anything. That sort of excited me in projects. But quite quickly learned that data is an amazing thing and information is an amazing thing. And if you can find ways of harnessing that and creating systems around what we're going to do to look at project performance, asset performance, systems for future, decision-making processes. So it's been sort of a bit of how my role is shaped up in what I'm doing moving forward. So really glad to be here with BEMMEP and AMCA, who have been very, very active and involved along the journey that we decided to set off on seeing if we could set up a Victorian digital asset strategy. So we started off talking about BIM. Should we have a BIM strategy for projects? And quite quickly we moved to a digital asset strategy because we think it's quite important to look at the whole life cycle of assets. So in Victoria, we do like building shiny new stuff. We spend a lot of time going, let's build a tunnel, let's build a road. It's really exciting and you can see it at the end. But the benefits I think we can gain from information and how we connect information and data and use it for not just the build phase or asset build, asset improvement, but over the whole life cycle of an asset. So that's been a bit of our passion, which is why we've called it the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy and looking at how we actually move forward on that. So a little bit about, just briefly, I sit within the Office of Projects Victoria. So the Office of Projects Victoria look at the whole portfolio of projects across government, so everything in Victoria that gets built, and whether it's road, rail, hospitals, education, arts, IT, we have that remit to look at projects and how we can assist in system-wide processes, which is sort of how VDAS fits into that. How do we actually help government look at moving into adopting technology, looking at data. And one of the things we've found, I was very lucky last year that I've counted 280 meetings with different stakeholders, industry groups, government agencies, to try and understand what their sort of needs are. And every single agency has a data transformation project or a digital transformation project. They're all a little bit different, but there's a lot of stuff happening in this space, and it's how we actually connect all that together to move forward, which I think is really important. So why change? Why do we need to have change in this space? And I think it's partly about looking at what we're going to need in the future. So to make really good decisions within government, looking at the decision-making process around, you know, what is society doing? What are our needs moving forward? How do people live, work and act? And there's a lot of information and data that's starting to get gathered around that. What do we need in assets? So what are our current assets doing and what is the condition of those assets? How can we leverage those assets? What do we need to build to move forward? What's our long-term plan in 30 years of what we might need and how technology and society and everything will change? And so there's a whole lot of work that's being done in areas that are, you know, across different groups. It's how we actually bring all this together to come up with a sort of consolidated view And I very much believe that we need a sort of a decision-making process that looks at, you know, future cities, asset development, asset utilisation, changing needs, technology growth, future-proofing. There's a whole lot of areas that we're trying to bring together, and we see this across different agencies. So groups like some of the communities of practice we've got, you know, seminars and you know, innovation forums like today, bringing people together to start talking about it. And we had sort of a great conversation in the 5 minutes leading up to this. It's about how we actually set ourselves up to move towards this and what do we need to do. And in my role, particularly in government, is a little bit broader than just projects. It's actually looking at engineering as a whole and the state and what do we need to do to move towards the state. And I think through that role, we've been able to coordinate a whole lot of people around interest areas of how we can make progress and mobilising people. So last year, very resource limited, but we were able to what I call crowdsourcing work in the space. So VDAS is certainly one of those areas, and AMCA were one of those people involved in helping us contribute to coming up with what the initial philosophy and framework around VDAS would be, then working towards a strategic framework which we released in February. And then what is it we're going to do to move forward? How do we actually set up guidance for governments so they can, and assistance and mobilising people to assist, which I think is going to be hugely important. So where we've been in the past is, you know, we've seen a lot of sort of disparate systems, and you know, we're starting to get little pockets of data, assets, you know, CAD drawings, GIS spatial. We've got really good groups that are doing a whole lot of work around how cadastral accuracy in land use Victoria. So we're starting to see a whole lot of work around getting accuracy around data, systems that help. We're starting to build digital assets. So with each new project that goes out there, we look at how we can actually get sort of digital engineering on those projects. So at the end of the day, when they hand it over to asset managers, we have information. I did spend 2 days this week up in Sydney at a asset management conference for critical assets. One of the big things I talked about is that we have probably, in government particularly, we've got asset owners. So I'm a board member of VicTrack, so we own all the trains and the track and everything in that space in train, rail, tram in Victoria. But we don't own and operate it. We don't build new stuff, but we also operate the telecommunications network. So it's looking at things like that. How do you bring all those things together when you've got different agencies that are doing different things? So as an asset owner or an asset builder or an asset operator, we have to look at how we build all that information together to come up with a system where you've got information that can flow across that for the benefit of leveraging assets moving forward. Where we want to work to is, you know, we've developed the initial framework for digital asset strategy, which we released in February. We're now currently on the program of working towards the guidelines, and I'll talk about that shortly. But it's also looking at how it can have an impact on decision making. So we actually launched the National Task Force for Future Cities in Sydney this week. And it's saying, what are the key things we need to consider? And it's around what are our assets, what are future, you know, communities need, how do we move towards that, what are the things we need to consider such as sustainability and data, how can we enhance people's lives? And it's trying to come up with that framework around, can we get to a decision-making framework where we incorporate these things? And I think that's a big part of my role, is looking how we actually bring all those things together as we move forward. I do see there's a massive change in people shifting towards this. There's the huge debate about data security, who should own it, where should it sit. I had the chief engineer and global manager from Hewlett-Packard that was out a couple of months ago. I want that title, global manager. But he talked about data and he said, we can track Katy Perry in 30 seconds of whatever she does around the world through tweets, but we can't track a plane in the sky. And then he went on to say that a plane downloads a terabyte of data a day per plane. I'm going, where is this data going? So it's looking at the big debate about where data should sit, who should own it, who should get asset. I think it's a really big conversation. His view was that, whoever collects the data should own the data, but also try and consider what data we should collect and not sort of try and boil the ocean where we just bring in so much we're overwhelmed. And then what is the interface in that data? So you might only need the tweet between data or the small API of the data interface. So I think this is still an evolving area. I was actually at I stopped in a Honeywell conference also on Wednesday, and they were saying, we've got to put all data up in the cloud, and everyone should have access, and this is what we've got to do. And I'm going, I'm pretty sure that's why I couldn't get home last night from Sydney, because there's so much data in the cloud that it was creating a bloody windstorm and the planes can't land. The runways were shut down. Anyway, bit of a joke. But I think there's this big argument of where data should sit, who should own it, what's the security, and we're all trying to work through that. And I think sometimes we try and overthink that. But when you get back to really, really simple things around what is it that we actually need, what do we actually need to transfer to people, how they interface with that. And I think that's going to be a really big point moving forward. So our roadmap on VDAS is looking at how we empower people. So the Victorian Digital Asset Strategy was coming up with a sort of a framework around what we think we need for digital assets, for the whole of lifecycle of assets. And we actually spent quite a bit of work in testing this through groups, including Melbourne, through ACMA, through other industry groups, through the UK. We actually, funny enough, when we put our first strategic framework out for consultation, we sent it out to a select group of 20 and said, confidential, don't share. We got 170 responses back, including from countries like Finland and Canada. We went, how did that happen? So it's gained this whole momentum because everybody's interested in getting on the journey. And one of the key things, we're very cautious it's not about systems and products, it's about how can we actually come up with a framework and people can then decide what to apply. But industry pretty much came back to us and said, just define it, just tell us what you want. Identify a classification system and then everyone will follow it and we can get consistency. So that's been really, really surprising. So we've looked at how we can build that into the guidelines, which we're currently working on, which will go to consultation probably in September, but to look towards what can assist government and industry and consistency across Australia or globally, like particularly using the standards to make sure we align, because a lot of the companies that you work in now are global. You don't want to do something different in every state or in different countries. So it's how can we actually come up with something that's sensible, practical, and we provide that guidelines towards how people can start to implement that. So I think that's a really big thing. We did look at why we talked about whole of life cycle of assets, and I won't, not all the words you can read, but it was looking at trying to consider decision making from government's decision on assets and asset utilisation and what they need to invest in to build. So we're starting to build this framework now. Business case and decisions about types of assets and the types of strategies and outcomes and scope through delivery, but the big gain is definitely in asset operations and maintenance. That's where, you know, we might spend 2 or 3 years building an asset. We'll spend the next 50, 100 years managing that asset. And there's a massive amount of data, and what can we build into new projects moving forward? So we've been really happy that some of the new projects that are coming up in Victoria, pretty much any major project has actually got an digital asset strategy. We're working with them to look at how we build that into procurement processes so they can go out to the market. How do we assist mobilising people to help government set up the right sort of framework? How do we upskill? How do we get enough people into this space? So it's a particularly big area that we're focused on at the moment. Our pathway, and I'll just touch briefly on this, is moving towards, we've done our strategic framework that we released in February. Guidance we're currently working on, so it'll go out to consultation, and we are so happy for everyone to be involved and in that process and consult, advise, contribute, because it's got to be something that works for industry as well. And then we'll move towards, so we're hoping to have that sort of finalised by about November, and then moving into technical guidance. And the technical guidance is really to look at how do we provide some guidance and frameworks and templates and tools for government to help them. But one of the big things that we're going to need is how do we look at trying to upskill and educate people about BIM, about digital engineering, about the benefits, and also looking at how do we mobilise people to help them, because there's certainly not enough skill within government. There certainly is a lot of skill in industry, so it's how do we actually mobilise people to help them start that journey and embed something that they can then use and upskill them moving forward. So I implore to you that we're really going to call on you to come and help. We're going to need it. Digital asset strategy, I think we've already talked about that, but I think we've also set up a national digital engineering group, and they're looking at how we create this commonly across government. So we were lucky enough on our journey that so many people came and helped, including Transport for New South Wales, Infrastructure New South Wales, AMCA, all the groups that have already done a whole lot of work in this area, people out of the UK. So they said, take everything we've got and see what you can do. So we've taken that, tested it, roadmapped it, and we've actually probably, that might have been 1.0 or 2.0, we've taken it to the next level of 3.0. So we've now said to all the other states, we're happy to give that back. You can take everything we've got, rebrand it, do what you like with it. So I think there's a whole lot of collaboration that's occurring for the betterment of the industry so people can move forward. And so I've been really, really impressed with that. Short-term goals. So, you know, obviously getting out our strategic guidance and guidelines, and building probably, there's probably training packages, and we've got a couple of universities involved in building training packages and what that might look like, particularly for, and I'm not talking about necessarily just people coming out of university, so it'd be good if we were able to import that into university courses as well to upskill people coming out. But I'm saying we need education packages at ministerial level, CEOs, agency delivery, practitioners, project directors, which is probably a whole lot of different types of education, and some of it's a bit infomercial perhaps, just so they can understand the benefits. So I think we need to do a whole piece of that. For this to land and to work and be embedded, we actually really need to have that sort of understanding of what it is, why we're doing it, and distill it down to the right levels for different people in different roles. So that's a really, really big part of what we're trying to set up moving forward. 2 years, obviously we'd like government agencies on every single project to have a strategy, a plan, and to start building up resources. 5 years, it to be something that particularly, government value. We're starting to collect information on the benefits, industry are mobilising, and also upskilling, and we start to grow what we can do, particularly on infrastructure, build and operations and maintenance. So I think that's sort of our goal. We are looking at, there's been pockets of excellence, particularly I've seen in New South Wales around transport, on digital engineering. There's been really good pockets of excellence around hospitals and health. We're looking at how do we actually create something, and my role is create something that's a framework across the whole portfolio. So in office projects, like I said, we need linear, place-based, systems-based, and to move towards decision-making process around future cities. So it's got to contain all these things, and only with starting to build up digital assets and then looking at what that decision-making process is, I think is massively important. I think I'll skip past that because we're heading towards the guidance. I think I've mentioned that before, so hopefully that'll be out in November, but we are, if you're interested in contributing or want to review and input into that or provide comments, please let us know. We are happy to take all comments because I think it's something if we own as a collective and a community of practice, you'll get to something that's closer. And will it be perfect? Will it suit everything? Probably not, but it might be our best chance to move forward and make a major step, and we'll have to keep adjusting as we go along and as we learn more and as technology develops. Our guidance is a big part of people implementing digital engineering, we've found, is trying to understand their organisation themselves. And I see this, there's a group that was set up, it was called Transport Without Borders in Department of Transport last year, which is now in DTF. And they actually got together in a group to see what do we need to do in digital engineering. And there's quite a good view from people that are involved in project delivery and build. From an asset owner, I think particularly we've been through the AMAF, which is the Asset Management Attestation Framework, in government agencies trying to understand what their assets are, what condition they're in and what they need to do. So we're starting to get this information flow through now. But then what do we need to gather moving forward? So on data, what do we do? Where do we spend our money? What will make the biggest difference to bring value to our organisations? They're just starting on that journey. And so it's how we can also help mobilise people to assist them in doing that. Because I think it's something, they haven't been in that headspace. You've had, particularly agencies, you've had budgets where you had an annual budget and then you went out and spent that on maintenance every year. Moving forward into asset maintenance, you want to spend it in the right places. You want to understand the condition of your assets. So then on new projects coming forward, how do we build in systems, data collection, technology such as sensors, and there's a number of projects around about sensors on bridges at the moment that I'm involved in. It's how do you capture really good information that feeds into this model, so you start getting live and dynamic sort of data interaction and information sharing in a really, really effective way. So you make better decisions. So I think we're starting to move towards that, but we've still got a fair way to go. And I think people that can assist on trying to ask those questions or help organisations move towards that, I think is really important. So government, there's a whole lot of different strategies and policies. We're really keen on aligning to the ISO 55000. We have the AMAF, which is the Asset Management Attestation Framework, which DTF set up, and that's something that government have to now respond to and attest to what their assets are in condition every year. There's also Local Government Act that's about to be passed, that even local governments will have to have an asset management plan and an asset manager. And I think this will be sort of passed before November. And B, particularly under Emergency Services Act, which came out last year, that if there's any flood, fire, etc., they need to have accurate information on asset condition within the last 12 months. And so, you know, a lot of these agencies, 50% of their maintenance budget is about inspection and quality inspection and data. There's a whole lot of technology that can help that. So it's how we actually come up with something that's really simple and usable for some of these councils. And some councils do it really well, others not so much. Like, they're time poor. There might be one engineer that's in that council and he's responsible for signing off plans and building roads and coming up with a strategic framework and being the asset manager. So I think there's a really good opportunity if we can come up with a simple way of and looking at good technology that can help those, because there's a massive change in that area. VDAS Lifecycle, we're really quite keen on looking at embedding technology and understanding of building from, you know, the cradle on decision making on types of assets, understanding of assets, utilisation, investment on projects, right through to design changes, design decisions, delivery, and then asset operations and maintenance. And then how we keep learning on that on the way through. So that's the area that we're trying to tackle. And then I guess the last one was within Department of Treasury and Finance. They're very invested in investment life cycle, but we think all these things need to start to come together because they need to interrelate. And I think we haven't quite got there. We're looking at how we map that and how we actually get some of that commonality that flows across so you don't respond to different things in different places. Information flow, I guess a particular thing is recognising that, so obviously in government side we invest, so we're an asset owner. We also are an asset builder, which are some separate groups. We get head contractors involved, and we quite often focus on head contractors, but a lot of work happens also down in the supply chain. So it's very much a part of, you know, what is a supply chain, who supports that, where is the technology coming from, who's collecting the data, how does that feed in? And it's not just head contractors, it's subcontractors, it's support services, it's data collection and heading into operations and maintenance systems. So I think there's a whole big thing that we don't tell, that story around what the entire supply chain is. And I think that's really important, that everyone's got a part, but it's how do you bring those parts together moving forward? So VDAS, you know, we're looking at VDAS and VBIS. So how do the two things, and this is sort of similar to the government stuff about how do we actually make some of these different areas and policies, etc., come together. So we're looking at particularly about collaboration, common data environments, and what that might look like. And so we're going to try to help, and we need assistance to help people advise us on what that should be. Data classifications is massive. If we get this right, and we may not get it right, we may just pick a classification system, but if we start to get that proliferated across, everybody's going to start to collect data and classifications in a certain way. So, you know, no matter what we do, you know, a light pole is a light pole is a light pole, and there might be, you know, 50 options of what they are, but we have the same sort of criteria. And then we can start to look at how data comes together. You know, Land Use Victoria doing some amazing work in the cadastral space, GIS data. So if we could actually look at how those things start to come together And I mentioned earlier, every single agency has a different data transformation project. And a lot of people started calling it data revolution. And I don't think it is. I think it's data evolution. So I think it's about, we're going to continue to evolve, and we may not get it right, or we may come up with a system and we need to modify it over time, but I think we have to make a start and then try and see how many people we can get aligned that do that. So then, in 5 years' time, you can look back and say, oh, we can manage to get land use Victoria's and OPV's data and industry data and all these things starting to mesh or integrate or interface. So I think that's a big part of the journey moving forward. So building information systems, mentioned before, the big debate about standards, the open standard, open access to data. We've got lots of community groups that are now crowdsourcing data and having data input. I think this is going to be a big thing moving forward of how we capture people that can feed data into our system and how we integrate that with other sources of data. So I think there's probably a big piece to be done around not just crowdsource or public source data, but also about how we actually get the interfaces between data sets and then who should see what and that security levels moving forward. I guess I mentioned this a little bit early on, and it's looking at that sort of whole life cycle and, being in a space where most of my early career was about 2D drawings that were printed out in, hard copy. We still have a road agency that will, even though designers will go out and build, really great 3D models and linked data, etc., at the end of the day, when they need to hand over that information to an asset owner, they're required to print it out in PDF format so it could be uploaded into a system. We've got to move past that. So it's also how do we actually change the systems on the other side of where information goes and gets stored moving forward. So timeline, so September, as I said, we've got the draft and go out for consultation. Tim Mumford's our lead in that space. We've got AECOM involved as well doing that. So if people are interested in seeing the draft and contributing, we're happy. I think in the last round we had in the strategic framework, I think there was like 800 different people that commented. So we're trying to see, and I've got my two great leads in this area sitting down the front that are, if we could get 3,000 comments that they've got to deal with, that'll keep them busy for at least the next year. No. But hopefully we'll head towards trying to come up with a final by about December. So close it off in November and a final that we'll release in December. We then are also working on prefabrication and modularisation guides, so looking at how we actually do things the same. And a key example is I know that on a particular level crossing program that I've got one contractor that builds substations, and he said it's been so awesome, I've got to build the same substation 23 times and be paid for the design. And I went, that's actually not that good. We've got to get smarter about some of this stuff and get some standards. So there's a big piece in this about how do we get smarter about not repeating the same stuff? How do we get these library of standards? And so there's a whole piece that we're also looking at in that space. Sustainability is another platform we've got, looking at changes in standards, but looking at materials particularly. So how do we actually change? We've got a massive shortage on crushed rock and cement and steel. So are there alternate products we can use out of the stockpiles of waste that we're now not able to ship to China? Imagine that. It's now focused our attention on how can we actually build those into our products that we need moving forward. And a big part of that is looking at what that would take, how do we get sort of confidence around building those products in, and predictive testing and technologies developed to the point that we can do that. And then how do we get past the acceptability and change bit? And I think that's a really big part, that the acceptability and change, whether it's in organisations or social change, we don't do a lot of work on. And the people that had the, I'm pretty sure all the smarts in the room are probably engineering, technical background. We're not as good at the social change bit. And I think that's going to be a really, really big part moving forward. So I think that's really some of the key areas that we're focused on. And I think we can make a lot of difference, but we've made massive progress in 18 months, and it's because the community supported us. We crowdsourced projects, we got everybody involved, and we've made massive progress. So it's how we coordinate that. What can you help with? What are you interested in? So that's what I'm sort of keen to hear as we move through this conference. So thank you.